The message arrived on a Tuesday morning, the kind of ordinary morning that usually passes without leaving any mark on memory. I was halfway through my coffee when my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. At first, I ignored it. Most messages that early were work-related or advertisements pretending to be important. But the name on the screen made me stop. Daniel. My younger brother never texted before noon. He lived his life in a rhythm that started late and ended even later, a habit that had followed him since college. So when I saw his name flashing on the screen before 8 in the morning, something about it felt unusual. I opened the message. "Hey, I need you to come today, it's important." No explanation, no context, just that. A few seconds later, another message appeared. "It's a surprise wedding." I stared at the words for a moment, convinced I had misread them. A wedding. Today. And a surprise. For most families, weddings are the opposite of surprises. They are events planned months, sometimes years, in advance. Venues are booked, invitations mailed, guest lists negotiated like fragile peace treaties. Entire weekends revolve around rehearsals, dinners, and photographs. But Daniel had always done things differently. Growing up, he was the one who would decide to take a road trip at midnight or quit a job without warning because he had found something more interesting. Where I preferred structure, Daniel trusted impulse. So the idea of a sudden wedding somehow felt perfectly consistent with who he was. Still, something about it lingered in my mind as strange. "Today," I replied. His response came quickly. "Yes, ceremony starts at 5. Just come, trust me." Trust me. The phrase should have sounded reassuring. Instead, it carried a faint edge of urgency I couldn't quite explain. A moment later, a location appeared in another message, an address outside the city, somewhere I had never heard of. "Please don't tell anyone yet," Daniel added. "It's supposed to be a surprise." That part confused me even more. How exactly does someone attend a wedding that's supposed to be a surprise? But I didn't ask. Daniel had always loved dramatic gestures. Maybe he wanted the ceremony to feel spontaneous, intimate, different from the traditional events our relatives expected. I told myself that was all it was. Romance disguised as chaos. I finished my coffee, got dressed, and spent the next few hours trying not to overthink something that was probably simple. By mid-afternoon, I was driving out of the city toward the address Daniel had sent. The road gradually narrowed as the buildings disappeared behind me. Suburbs gave way to long stretches of trees and open fields. The sky was clear, the sunlight soft in that late afternoon way that makes everything look slightly cinematic. It felt like the kind of setting someone would choose for a wedding meant to feel private. And maybe that was the point. Daniel had mentioned his girlfriend, Claire, plenty of times over the past year. I had met her twice, once at dinner, once at a birthday party. She seemed kind, intelligent, a little quieter than Daniel but somehow balanced by his energy. They seemed happy together. At least, that was what I had believed. The GPS eventually directed me down a gravel road that curved through a line of tall trees before opening into a wide clearing. The venue appeared suddenly at the end of the path. It was a large house, almost a small estate, painted white with wide windows that reflected the late afternoon sunlight. Behind it stretched a garden decorated with rows of white chairs facing a small wooden arch covered in flowers. People were already gathered outside. Cars lined the driveway, and guests stood in clusters across the lawn, holding glasses and talking quietly. For a moment, I simply sat in the car and watched. It looked beautiful. Everything about the place felt carefully arranged. The flowers matched the decorations. The lighting strung between trees created a soft glow even before sunset, and a small string quartet played music near the garden. It didn't look like something planned in a hurry. If this was a surprise wedding, it was a surprisingly well-prepared one. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the house. Almost immediately, I noticed something that made me pause. There were people there, I didn't recognize. That alone wasn't unusual. Every wedding includes friends and relatives from both sides of a couple's life. But these guests seemed different somehow. They didn't look like Daniel's friends. Most of them stood slightly apart from one another, dressed in professional-looking suits rather than the relaxed outfits Daniel's circle usually preferred. Their conversations were quiet, focused, more serious. As I approached the garden, I spotted someone I did recognize. My Aunt Maria stood near the drinks table, holding a glass and scanning the crowd. When she saw me, her expression shifted from relief to confusion. "You came too?" she asked. "Of course," I said. "Daniel invited me." She frowned slightly. "He told you today?" "Yeah, this morning." "That's strange." "Why?" Maria hesitated. "Well, I received the invitation 3 days ago." The words hung in the air longer than they should have. 3 days. "That's odd," I said slowly. Maria shrugged, though her expression suggested she had already been wondering the same thing. "Maybe he just forgot to tell you earlier." "Maybe." But Daniel forgetting to invite his own brother until the morning of his wedding felt unlikely. Before I could think about it further, someone called my name. I turned and saw Daniel walking toward me across the lawn. He looked happy. Not the calm, composed happiness people often display at formal weddings, but the energetic excitement that had always defined him. His dark hair was slightly messy despite the formal suit he wore, and his smile spread wide the moment he reached me. "You made it." He hugged me quickly. "Of course I made it," I said. "You said it was important." "It is." He stepped back and glanced around the garden. "Isn't this place incredible?" "It is," I admitted. "But when exactly did you plan all this?" Daniel's smile flickered for a moment. "Recently." That was the only answer he offered. "Where, Claire?" I asked. "Inside, getting ready." "Everything okay?" "Perfect." His tone sounded confident, but something about the way he said it felt rehearsed. Almost as if he had already answered that question several times today. Before I could ask anything else, someone approached Daniel from behind. A man in a gray suit. He looked to be in his mid-40s, tall, with neatly combed hair and the kind of calm expression people develop after years of handling serious business. He leaned slightly toward Daniel and spoke quietly. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw Daniel's expression change. For a split second, the excitement vanished from his face, replaced by something closer to tension. He nodded quickly. "I'll be there in a minute," he told the man. The man glanced briefly at me before walking away toward the house. "Who was that?" I asked. Daniel hesitated. "A friend of Claire's family." Something about that answer felt incomplete. But before I could press further, the music shifted and guests began moving toward the rows of chairs in the garden. "Looks like it's starting," Daniel said. He squeezed my shoulder. "I'm really glad you're here." Then he walked toward the house. I watched him disappear through the door. Around me, guests slowly took their seats as the sky began turning a soft shade of orange behind the trees. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Claire walked down the aisle in a simple white dress that moved gently in the evening breeze. Her expression was calm, almost serene, and when she reached Daniel at the arch, they both smiled in a way that looked genuine. The vows were short but emotional. Daniel promised loyalty. Claire promised partnership. The officiant spoke about trust, commitment, and building a future together. From the outside, everything looked exactly like what it was supposed to be. Two people in love beginning a new chapter. But as the ceremony ended and applause filled the garden, I found myself thinking about the small things that didn't quite fit. The man in the gray suit. Maria receiving her invitation days earlier. The unfamiliar guests. And the quiet urgency in Daniel's voice that morning. When the reception began, Music replaced the soft ceremony atmosphere. Guests moved toward the house, and the outdoor tables arranged across the lawn. Waiters carried trays of drinks and food, while conversations grew louder and more relaxed. At least, most of them did. Several of the unfamiliar guests remained near the edges of the gathering, speaking quietly among themselves. They weren't celebrating. They were observing. At one point, I stepped inside the house to grab another drink. The hallway was quieter than the garden outside. As I passed one of the open rooms near the back of the house, I heard voices. Daniel's voice, and the man in the gray suit. I wasn't trying to listen, but the words reached me before I could move away. "Everything needs to be finalized tonight," the man said calmly. "I know," Daniel replied. "And the agreement." A brief pause followed. Then Daniel said something that made me stop walking. "It's signed." Silence settled in the hallway. For a moment, I wondered if I had misunderstood what I heard. Signed. Agreement. Those weren't words people usually used when talking about weddings. Another voice joined the conversation. "Claire, we just need to make sure everyone sticks to the plan." The plan. I stood there for another second, my mind struggling to interpret what I had just heard. Finally, I stepped away and returned to the garden. The music continued. Guests laughed, glasses clinked together, and the newly married couple posed for photographs beneath the lights. From the outside, the evening looked joyful. Perfect. But something inside me had shifted. What I had overheard didn't sound like the private conversation of two people celebrating their marriage. It sounded like a negotiation. Later that night, as the reception continued, I walked past the same hallway again. This time, the room door stood slightly open. Inside, a stack of documents rested on the table. Curiosity pulled me closer. One page had been left partially visible. I didn't mean to read it, but the title at the top of the page caught my eye. Agreement of terms. Below it were two signatures. Daniel and Claire. The word marriage appeared several times in the text, but it didn't appear in the context I expected. It appeared alongside phrases like duration, conditions, and financial distribution. For a moment, the entire celebration outside seemed to fade. Because what I was looking at didn't resemble the foundation of a marriage. It looked like the framework of a contract. A deal. I stepped back slowly. Outside, laughter echoed across the lawn as Daniel and Claire raised their glasses for another toast. Everyone believed they were witnessing the beginning of a love story. But standing in that quiet hallway, staring at the document I had just seen, I realized something unsettling. This wedding might not have been about love at all. And whatever agreement Daniel and Claire had signed tonight, it was only the beginning of something far more complicated than anyone at this wedding realized. That was the moment curiosity turned into something else. Determination. Because if this marriage was built on a secret agreement, I needed to understand why. And that meant the real story of this wedding was only just beginning. For the rest of the evening, I carried a secret no one else seemed to notice. Outside, the reception continued exactly the way a wedding reception should. Music floated through the garden, people laughed loudly over glasses of champagne, and Daniel and Claire moved from table to table, accepting congratulations. Everything looked joyful. Everything sounded joyful. But once you've seen something you weren't supposed to see, the entire room begins to feel different. The document in that quiet room replayed in my mind again and again. Agreement of terms. Duration. Conditions. Financial distribution. Those were not the words of romance. They were the language of negotiation. And suddenly, the entire wedding began to look different. The decorations still sparkled under the lights. The flowers still smelled fresh. The string quartet still played softly near the trees. But beneath all of it, something colder existed. Planning, strategy, calculation. I watched Daniel as he laughed with a group of guests near the bar. Anyone else would have believed the performance completely. His smile looked natural, his posture relaxed, his arm wrapped comfortably around Claire's shoulder. They looked like a happy couple. But now, I knew there was another layer beneath that image. And once you notice the second layer, the first one starts to feel like a costume. I decided not to confront him immediately. Instead, I started paying attention. Listening. Observing. Because secrets have a way of revealing themselves if you give them enough time. The first clue came from my Aunt Maria again. She found me near one of the garden tables while guests were lining up for food. "You look distracted," she said. "Just tired," I replied. She studied my face for a moment, the way older relatives often do when they sense something unspoken. "Something strange about tonight, isn't there?" she said quietly. The comment caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" Maria leaned slightly closer. "Daniel and Claire. What about them?" "I don't know." She admitted, "It just feels rushed." That word landed heavily. "Rushed? How long have they even been engaged?" she asked. "I'm not sure," I said honestly. Maria shook her head. "Neither am I." We both looked toward the newly married couple. "They announced it only a few weeks ago," she added. That detail struck me immediately. Only a few weeks. Yet somehow they had arranged a venue, catering, decorations, music, and a full guest list. Even small weddings usually required months of preparation. But this one had appeared almost overnight, which meant one of two things. Either they had moved at an impossibly fast speed, or the planning had started long before anyone was told. The second possibility lingered in my mind. Later in the evening, I noticed the man in the gray suit again. He stood near the edge of the lawn speaking with two other guests who looked equally formal. Their conversation appeared serious, their expressions focused. Not celebratory. At one point, Daniel walked over and joined them. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I noticed something strange. They weren't congratulating him. They were discussing something. Hands gestured subtly. One of the men pulled out a phone and showed Daniel something on the screen. Daniel nodded. The conversation lasted less than a minute before they separated again. It felt less like a wedding interaction and more like a business meeting that happened to be occurring near a dance floor. My curiosity deepened. Eventually, I found myself inside the house again. The hallway where I had seen the documents earlier was now quiet. Most guests had stayed outside, drawn by the music and lights. I walked slowly toward the room. The door remained slightly open. Inside, the stack of papers still rested on the table. My heart beat a little faster as I stepped closer. I knew I shouldn't look again. But curiosity has a way of overpowering restraint. I entered the room and glanced at the top page. This time, I read more carefully. The document wasn't short. Several pages outlined what appeared to be detailed terms. Legal language. Specific conditions. One paragraph immediately caught my attention. Marriage shall remain valid for a minimum duration of 18 months. 18 months. Why would a marriage have a minimum duration? Another section mentioned financial compensation following the completion of certain conditions. Another referred to property transfer eligibility. And another referenced mutual confidentiality. Each sentence made the situation clearer. This wasn't a romantic document. It was an arrangement. A structured agreement between two people who had chosen marriage not as an emotional commitment, but as a strategic step toward something else. Footsteps suddenly echoed in the hallway. I stepped away from the table quickly and exited the room before anyone saw me. Outside, the music had grown louder as the evening progressed. Daniel and Claire were now dancing in the center of the lawn, surrounded by cheering guests. If anyone watching that moment suspected anything unusual, they didn't show it. The illusion of happiness was complete. But illusions only work when no one questions them. And I had started questioning everything. I spent the next hour speaking with different guests, casually asking small questions that slowly began forming a clearer picture. Daniel's friend Mark mentioned something interesting. "I thought they were already married," he said while pouring himself another drink. "You did?" I asked. "Yeah, Daniel told me months ago they were thinking about doing something official soon." Months ago. That detail aligned perfectly with my growing suspicion. If the idea of marriage had existed months earlier, then the sudden, surprise wedding wasn't sudden at all. It was simply the moment they chose to reveal it. Later, I overheard two of Claire's relatives discussing immigration paperwork. That word immediately triggered another possibility. Marriage could provide many advantages: legal residency, tax benefits, inheritance access, business partnerships, and if the agreement I saw mentioned property transfers, then perhaps the marriage had been arranged to unlock something specific, something valuable. The more I thought about it, the more the puzzle pieces started fitting together. The formal guests, the legal paperwork, the urgency in Daniel's voice, the secrecy around invitations. This wedding had not been organized in weeks. It had been planned for much longer. Only the announcement had been sudden. The truth itself had been quietly building behind the scenes. Around midnight, the celebration began slowing down. Guests started leaving, one group at a time. Eventually, only close family and a handful of friends remained. Daniel approached me near the garden lights. "You've been quiet tonight," he said. "Just watching." He smiled. "That sounds ominous." "Maybe." He laughed lightly. "You're overthinking again." That comment felt ironic considering what I had seen. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Sure. When did you really decide to marry Claire?" Daniel's expression changed slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, when did the idea first come up?" He hesitated. "Recently." The same answer he had given earlier. But now I knew it wasn't true. "Recently as in weeks," I said slowly. "Or recently as in months." For the first time that night, Daniel looked uncomfortable. "Why are you asking?" Because I had seen the contract. Because I had heard the conversation. Because none of this looked like love anymore. But I didn't say those words yet. Instead, I said something simpler. Because this wedding doesn't feel like a surprise. Daniel studied me carefully. "What are you trying to say?" "I'm saying it feels planned." A long silence followed. Finally, Daniel sighed. "Everything in life is planned," he said quietly. That answer confirmed more than he probably intended. At that moment, Claire walked over and joined us. "Everything okay?" she asked. Her voice sounded calm, but her eyes moved quickly between us. Daniel nodded. "Just talking." Claire looked at me. "About what?" I met her gaze directly. "About agreements." For a brief second, the expression on her face froze. Just long enough for the truth to reveal itself. Daniel immediately stepped in. "We should talk about this somewhere else," he said. We moved inside the house. The same quiet hallway. The same room with the documents. Claire closed the door behind us. "Tell us what you think you know," she said calmly. So I told them. About the conversation I overheard. About the documents on the table. About the terms mentioning duration and financial conditions. Neither of them interrupted. When I finished, the silence in the room felt heavy. Finally, Daniel spoke. "You weren't supposed to see that." "I know." Claire crossed her arms. "What exactly do you think the agreement means?" "I think it means this marriage is what everyone believes it is." Daniel rubbed his forehead slowly. It's complicated. Most secrets are. Claire stepped closer. What if the arrangement helps both of us? That doesn't change what it is. And what exactly is it? She asked. A deal. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Daniel exhaled slowly. Yes, he said. It is. The honesty surprised me. But it also confirmed everything. Claire sat down at the table and looked at the papers. This agreement allows me to gain access to property my family cannot transfer unless I'm legally married, she explained. Daniel added quietly, and once that property is transferred, we both benefit. How? Financially. And the 18 months. Claire answered that part. That's the minimum time required before the transfer becomes permanent. So the marriage lasts long enough to secure the property, I said. And then? Daniel shrugged slightly. We decide what happens next. The words felt colder than anything else that night. Because suddenly, the entire wedding became a performance. The vows. The smiles. The celebration. All of it existed to support a contract. You turned marriage into a business transaction, I said. Claire looked at me calmly. Many marriages already are. That answer lingered in the air. I thought about the guests outside. The laughter. The congratulations. Everyone believed they had witnessed love. But love had never been the central motive here. Opportunity had. For the first time since discovering the agreement, I realized the real question wasn't what Daniel and Claire had done. The real question was what I would do with the truth. Expose them. Protect them. Or walk away and pretend none of this existed. Daniel looked at me carefully. You're not going to tell anyone, are you? The room waited for my answer. And in that moment, I understood something important. Secrets are powerful, but the power doesn't belong to the people who create them. It belongs to the person who discovers them. I looked at the wedding photos, still being taken outside through the window. Two people smiling beneath bright lights. A perfect image of happiness. An illusion everyone wanted to believe. Your secret is safe, I finally said. For now. Because sometimes the most dangerous truths aren't the ones exposed immediately. They're the ones waiting quietly beneath the surface. And as I left the room and stepped back into the fatting celebration, one realization stayed with me. Love can inspire people to build beautiful things. But ambition can turn even a wedding into a contract. And once that happens, the difference between love and strategy becomes almost impossible to see.